Grace and peace. Apostle Cheryl Richardson here with Judah's Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. The topic for today will be the highly skilled and well-respected batterer. The highly skilled and well-respected batterer. We're going to take a look at law enforcement officers and what role they play when they are the batterer and what the dynamics are around a domestic violence situation that involves a person in authority. Okay, so before we get into our topic, we want to give you a second, if you've not done so already, to subscribe to our channel. All right, there is a subscribe button down here and there's a poll up here that we want you to participate in. We'll only take a quick second. We're going to give you an opportunity to do that, and then we will be back in a moment to discuss the highly skilled and well-respected batterer, with a focus in this segment on law enforcement. All right, I'll be right back. We're back. So thank you for taking the time to subscribe. It's down here somewhere. Thank you for taking the time to subscribe. We really appreciate it, so that you don't miss any future updates. So we've done a lot of research, and we came across this quote from Mark Wynn, who is a former Nashville police lieutenant, and he's a nationally recognized expert on domestic violence. And this is what he said: when you train someone to be a cop, anyone in this country, you train them to challenge when confronted. You train them to interrogate when suspicious. You train them to use fighting skills that no one else has. You train them how to use weapons. You train them how to deal with conflict. And you teach them all these skills. And then you add all of that to someone who is violent, and you've got a lethal combination on your hands. And I could not agree with him more. The domestic violence perpetrator who is highly skilled and who is well respected and whose position itself comes with a degree of respect from society at large has an unfair advantage over a victim because of the systems that they operate in, which garners them the respect of society as a whole. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to focus on law enforcement today, but there are other occupations that carry this same privilege. Someone who works in the legal profession, an attorney, a judge, someone in the medical profession, a doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a therapist. These are people whose position in life and in society garners them the respect of people far and wide. Without them knowing this person personally, there's an assumption of integrity. There's an assumption of honesty. There's an assumption that there's concern about humanity that is pretty much visited upon anyone who occupies these positions. Okay, and so it creates an almost formidable obstacle to someone who is dealing with domestic violence at the hands of one of these. Another occupation would be someone in politics. Okay, so we're going to look at this, but we're going to focus on law enforcement today. Now, check this out. Years ago, domestic violence incidents were considered private family matters. And I recall this even from being a young child when we would have incidents in our home, that it was considered private. It wasn't anything that you talked about outside of the home. If the law enforcement officers responded to an emergency in trying to soothe the batterer, trying to calm things down, telling the batterer to take a walk or whatever, and spend the night somewhere else, and it'll be okay tomorrow. Since then, although there is much work that yet needs to be done, there has been great improvement in terms of police officers and the associations connected with them recognizing that domestic violence is wrong and that it is a problem even among their own ranks. And so we, like I said, we have a lot of work to do in this regard, because oftentimes, victims call and they aren't helped very much or whatever. but there's so many dynamics that come into play. All right. Now, one of the things that I try to state often is that anyone can be a victim and anyone can be an abuser. So there's one set of complications when you're talking about a police officer who may be a batterer and is highly respected in the community. Um, and it's a whole nother set of dynamics that comes into play when the victim is a police officer who is highly skilled and well respected in the community. Okay. Now, anyone can be a victim and anyone can be an abuser. When the abuser is a law enforcement officer, there are unique dynamics at play which serve to increase the danger to the victim. So the victim is in increased danger because of the dynamics that surround the situation in which the batterer is highly trained and well respected. Okay. The investigation and prosecution of law enforcement involved domestic violence cases is challenging. So prosecutors, I've learned in my research, prosecutors even find it challenging because of contending with all of these same innate um, dynamics that we've already mentioned. Um, we know that overall domestic violence is underreported. It's not reported widely in the general population, so much less so among law enforcement officers or people who occupy a status in society in which they are granted, you know, almost a halo. They are granted this privilege where they're not questioned and where they're not challenged. Okay. Um, there were two studies conducted in the 1980s. I thought this was really interesting. There were two studies conducted in the 1980s that suggested that the frequency of domestic violence was greater in police families than in the general population. It's greater in police family than in the general population. Now, so that correlates with the fact that in faith-based families, domestic violence is greater than in the general population. And the correlation would be the respect, the cover that the perpetrator has because of their occupation or because of their affiliation with this group who has been granted this privilege, the assumption that they are right no matter what they do. Okay. So, one survey of 728 officers from two East Coast departments found that 40% of the officers reported having gotten out of control and behaved violently towards their spouse or children during the previous 6 months. So they surveyed 728 law enforcement officers from two police departments on the East Coast in the United States, and they found that 40% of the officers reported having gotten out of control and behaved violently towards their spouse or children during the previous 6 months. In the second study, researchers asked 385 male officers from several agencies in the Southwest whether in the past year they had pushed, grabbed, shoved, slapped, kicked, thrown things at, choked, strangled, bitten, or beaten up, threatened their spouse or family with a gun or a knife. 28% of these officers admitted engaging in some form of these behaviors within the previous year. So now think about this. 28% of them are guilty of this. What is their response when they respond to a 911 call from a domestic violence victim? See? And so, in some instances, the lack of response, the looking the other way, the minimizing, the rationalizing may in fact be due to the fact that they are complicit in engaging in these same or similar behaviors with their own spouse, with their own partner, with their own children in their own home. Okay. Now, law enforcement officers have unequal opportunities to exert power and control due to their training, experience, and the inherent authority that they have due to the position that they hold in society. Okay. And so we know that domestic violence is all about power and control. It's not about love, it's about power and control. And they have an unfair advantage in terms of being able to perpetrate abuse and to get away with it because of the inherent respect that we afford them, almost without question. Okay. And so this is incredibly frightening for the victim who is involved in an abusive relationship with a law enforcement officer. Okay. In an intimate relationship, this authoritarian figure simply looking at you a certain way, or putting their hand on you a certain way, or the body language alone exudes authority, and they are trained on how to use their body to exude control in a situation that may be out of control. Okay, so that perpetrators, when they're in the course of their duties, understand who's in authority here. So the use of body language is almost second nature to a law enforcement officer. Okay, let's see. Stepping into the personal space of an intimate partner can convey a threat. Okay, it's a veiled threat. They haven't said anything, but they have said a whole lot. All right, and it makes it difficult to receive help, because what are you going to say? You're going to call 911 and you're going to say, well, he looked at me funny. And then they're going to look at you funny. Okay, and so they have an ability to express a threat, albeit veiled, but a threat nevertheless, without crossing that line into actually breaking the law. Okay, and this is what makes them incredibly dangerous. Now, the majority of our law enforcement officers, I'm sure, are law abiding citizens and treat their families with love and dignity and respect, but there are those who do not. Um, and although I think we're getting better at holding them accountable, this is not always the case. And the issue is that the abusive behaviors can rise to the upper ranks of the police department. And so we'll talk about a case which really served as a catalyst for opening the eyes of police departments worldwide. And it was a domestic violence case involving a chief of police. Okay. So, all right. So they are assumed to be credible in the opinion of society. And this perception can very easily be exploited by an abuser. Okay. No one will believe you over me. Now, the standard run of the mill abuser uses that with the victim. Imagine someone in a position of authority that's recognized by society without question. Imagine them saying to a victim, no one will believe you over me. Just imagine how terrifying that must be for a victim. All right. Gaslighting of fellow officers and the victim support system is not uncommon. They set the stage for being outed by inferring that a partner is crazy or acting out of control or suicidal or mentally imbalanced. Um, and so there's, complaining amongst the fellow officers, there's complaining amongst the support system. And so gaslighting is often in full operation. In full operation, and coupled with the authority and the credibility that they already enjoy from society, it is a formidable obstacle for an abuse victim to contend with. All right. So they set the stage. And that way, even if you tell as a victim, you look like you're crazy and you look like you're the problem, and they've been talking about you for quite some time. So this is not all of a sudden. And so people are prepared to expect that there's something wrong with the victim. They have been manipulated into believing that the victim is, in fact, the problem. All right. They may allude, like I said, to mental health issues, substance abuse issues that don't even exist. Anything that they can say that will color the perception of anyone who may think about coming to the aid of the abuse victim. Okay. So in 2007, Diane Wettendorf developed a police power and control wheel. So there's the power and control wheel that was developed in Duluth, Minnesota, many years ago. And then Diane Wettendorf amended it to more closely demonstrate what occurs when it's a law enforcement officer who is exuding this power and control. All right. The original power and control wheel was done by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, like I said, in Duluth, Minnesota. Okay, so you picture the power and control wheel. In the center of the wheel is, of course, at the heart of it, the center is power and control. And these other things are like spikes that come out around it. Okay, if you were to picture a tire on a bike. So the outer rim of the wheel includes four things: privilege, access, credibility, and power. Write that down: privilege, access, credibility, and power. Now, under privilege, under the realm of privilege, it includes a lack of options and psychological threats. So let's look at a lack of options. So under privilege, write down privilege and then write down lack of options. Here are the things that fall under that: service providers that are untrained or unwilling to help. The abuser knows the shelter and its location. The abuser has access to information to track the victim if he or she exits the relationship. They have access to technology that can help them to determine where the victim has fled to. Difficulty in obtaining an order of protection or even keeping one if the batterer is a law enforcement officer or someone who has credibility in the court system. All right. Remedies depend on police enforcement. So anything that a victim does in terms of a temporary restraining order or a permanent restraining order, it would rely on law enforcement to enforce it. So if you have a restraining order and you call the police and they are in cahoots with the batterer, you don't have any help and you've actually just made things worse. And so it really is a dilemma for victims. Okay. Now, also under privilege is psychological threats. Okay. He keeps his partner under his control without physical abuse. She's afraid he'll hurt her and anyone that supports her. So the psychological threats, the inference with the body language, the fact that a weapon is present in the home are all things that are on the mind of a victim all of the time, okay? And he may not verbalize a threat, but he doesn't have to. And what we know statistically is that the presence of a weapon in a home in which domestic violence is occurring, okay? And it doesn't have to have escalated to a physical assault. But if a firearm is present, there's a 500% increase in the likelihood that a homicide will occur. Okay, so this is a danger that accompanies someone who is involved with the police officer or law enforcement officer who obviously has a weapon at home. Okay. Afraid that he'll use the system against her or him, whoever the victim is, getting them arrested, getting them thrown in jail, thereby, jeopardizing their ability to maintain their employment, ruining their reputation, humiliating them. So they're concerned about that. Will also, from a psychological standpoint, have a victim not say anything regarding what they are experiencing. Okay. The abuser knows how to commit the perfect crime. Oftentimes they'll tell you, I know exactly how to do it. I could do this to you, or I could do that to you, and they'll never find your body. I could do this, and you'll never be able to prove it. They know where that line is. They know where the line is where legal action cannot be taken against them because they've not crossed the line. They're trained to know where the line is, right? All right. And then no one will believe you against the word of an officer. I've been decorated. I've gotten good, reports. I'm friends with the chief. They're not going to believe you. And besides, I've been telling them that you're a little off, that you've been depressed lately, that you've been behaving erratically, or about your substance abuse issue. Okay. And so the psychological abuse oftentimes is enough to keep the victim quiet, because they don't perceive a way out. And sadly, often their concerns really are well founded. Okay. So, number two, let's look at access. Access was another section on that power and control wheel that's been adapted for law enforcement. Okay. Under access, you have training. They control through intimidation, more presence, stance, voice, uniform, badge. So the appearance of the uniform, the badge, the gun, the way they use their body language, okay, as though they're dealing with a criminal in the street, is very intimidating and is very impactful when that's the environment that you live in. They know the continuum of force. They know how to use their body as a weapon. They know how to use arm locks and chokeholds, handcuffs, and other tools of the trade. And so, knowing that they are highly skilled and highly trained makes them a formidable foe when it comes to gaining freedom from an abusive situation concerning them. Okay. Um, they're able to access information about the victim's family, about the victim's friends, um, and sensitive information that they can then use against them. So access um, includes training, and it also includes their credibility. All right. So listen, let's look at credibility. The police response. He or she is the police. They are the police. So if you're a victim and you make an emergency call and the police respond, are they responding knowing that they're coming to an officer's house? And how does that affect their response? How does that impact their perception? Are they going assuming that the officer is in distress and needs assistance, which would make the abuser the problem? Or are they going thinking, rationalizing as they arrive, that there must be some logical explanation, this must be a misunderstanding? Or are they able to distance themselves from that and apply the rule of the law to the situation? And so this is a question that the victim struggles with prior to even making a call if they're involved with an officer. Okay. The other thing that can happen is if they've gone to a supervising officer and have shared their concerns, how was that handled? You know, as a former military commander, I can tell you that victims are concerned about if you're going to align yourself with your troop. Are you going to align yourself in this case? Will the supervising police officer or the police chief align themselves automatically with the officer without doing a thorough investigation? Okay. So that's a very, very real concern. All right. So if a victim places a call and it involves a police officer, and police officers respond, are they familiar with the address? Do they know this is a police officer's home? How does that affect their mindset and their perspective as they respond to this call? All right. Um, Colleagues may use their own discretion. They may decide on the scene, well, this is not a big deal, or this is, I'm going to just pull them to the side and tell him that, or her, that they just need to get some help. Okay. And then we won't write a report about it or anything. Okay. So colleagues may use their own discretion. The police report may reflect the abuser's version of the story because, of course, the assumption is that they're credible. And if gaslighting has occurred previously, then the conception could be, well, I've got this preconceived notion that you're a problem. He or she already told me that you're struggling with a drug problem, that you refuse to go to rehab. And so, and so the report may very well reflect that position. Okay. And then the police can fail to collect or preserve evidence. Okay, because of the credibility that the batterer is assumed to possess. Okay. Knowledge of law and court. He or she knows the court procedures and personnel, may even be friends with the judge, may be friends with the prosecutors in the prosecutor's office. Okay. Because typically these people are all on the same team. And so now they're being asked to view one another in light of betrayal, that the trust that's been bestowed upon them has been betrayed. And this is a big hurdle for many people to get over, okay? The batterer may present himself or herself well in court. They know what to say and they know what not to say in court. They've been trained on what to say and what not to say in a court setting. And so they are perfectly at home in a courtroom. And the presumption of credibility is alive and well, oftentimes. Okay. We're still talking about when the batterer is highly trained and well respected. Because the training is one aspect, but the respect that they are given further complicates the situation for an abuser, for an abuser's victim. His profession confers credibility, and only what can be proven counts. Okay. Then you've got power. There's institutional power, the gun, the badge, the brotherhood, okay, the blue line, judicial bias, access to information and equipment, the ability to get a phone tap or surveillance or put GPS on vehicles under the guise of doing their job. Like I said, the wall of blue or the blue line, which means that cops stick together. And so many will not help. They may even believe that their that their associate is wrong, but they're not going to cross that line and hold them accountable. All right. He knows how to circumvent the law and how to manipulate the legal system. Okay. Now, let's look at this. Officers who are abusers may relentlessly interrogate their activities, those of loved ones. So there's this constant interrogation that occurs. Okay. Many are skilled interrogators. They extract information and they keep the victim off balance, which is an underpinning of gaslighting and manipulation. The whole purpose of that is to cause the victim to question their own sanity, to question their own perceptions, to question what they just witnessed with their own eyes. Okay. Um, if uniformed officers appear in court in a large group, this could intimidate the victim, even if it's unintentional. So, in their attempt to show support for their comrade, this can further intimidate the victim. Okay, officers responding to a 911 call may be perceived by the victim to be there in support of the abuser, and this may not be the case, but that could very well be the perception of the victim. Okay. The officer's training and skill present tremendous barriers to number one, reporting the abuse in the first place, seeking safety, or participating in the criminal justice process. So, what do I mean by that? That even if they do make the call, and even if an arrest is made, they have a tremendous hurdle to get over in terms of even going through the court proceedings, showing up in court. Pressure maybe from others to drop the charges, not to ruin his career, et cetera, et cetera. And so here's another issue. If a conviction is secured, or even if a minor domestic violence crime results in a conviction, it could end the police officer's career. It could very well end their career, okay? And a possible loss of pension. So now you're talking about impacting the finances. You're talking about even if a divorce occurs, if he doesn't have employment, or she doesn't have employment, how are they supposed to do child support? How are they supposed to do alimony? So all of these things come into play and increase the pressure on a victim because of the financial duress that the family will then have to endure because the police officer has lost their employment or been demoted. Okay, now, then there's the heightened anger and desperation of the abuser, which could lead to lethal violence or retaliation. And so, in a typical domestic violence case, we as advocates, we tend to remind people, victims, that 30 to 90 days after an incident, you are in heightened danger. And so, if you're looking at someone in law enforcement or someone in a position of authority, someone in which credibility is given without question, pretty much, and they lose that status, then it could really be triggering, and the victim will be seen as the blame. Had they not said anything, had they been a better partner, Had they been a better mother, had they not burned the eggs, who knows? Then all of this would not have happened. Okay, and so as we begin to wrap this up, I wanted you to know that the International Association of Chiefs of Police have identified warning signs to help them to discern when one of their officers may be involved in domestic violence behaviors in their own homes. So, excessive tardiness or absence, complaints of excessive force or disrespect on the job, aggressive behavior towards others, disparaging remarks about intimate partners. Now, this is a classic gaslighting technique where, over a period of days or weeks or months or even years, the character of the victim is assassinated. And so it is impugned upon and with these disparaging remarks. And so that if a case is reported, if it does come to light that the victim's credibility is in question, their mental stability is in question, their character is in question, okay? Um, so that's a fairly diabolical thing that occurs often in domestic violence situations, okay? But more so when you have someone in a profession in which credibility and respect is assumed, okay? Inappropriate treatment of animals is another indicator, and excessive on or off duty injuries. And so these are all warning signs that have been identified by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. All right. So there's much more that we need to do regarding stamping out domestic violence, ending it, stopping it. And it's going to take all of us. The United Nations declared it a global pandemic several years ago. Long before COVID-19 emerged on the scene. But now we understand what a pandemic is. And so this is how serious a problem domestic violence is worldwide. We appreciate you joining us. And in order to partner with us, you can give, you can sow. That information is in the description box here with the links to how you can support us. But also you can support us by simply sharing this video. Share it, like it, comment, and we appreciate your support. This is Apostle Cheryl Richardson, and we'll be back with you again. We'll be talking about domestic violence and all of its many layers. Blessings to you.